Let's jump right into this explainer and forensically break down a tactical siege that absolutely shocked the 2026 World Cup. This really wasn't just a game of football. It was a cinematic David versus Goliath thriller from start to finish. We're going to explore exactly how a massive tournament favorite was completely nullified and how an impenetrable defensive wall was built, brick by agonizing brick. 78%. Just let that number sink in for a second. Spain utterly dominated possession at 78%. They had the ball constantly. They moved it left, they moved it right. They practically set up camp in the opposition's half. The pressure was relentless, an absolute suffocating presence that, frankly, usually breaks teams down within the first 20 minutes. And they didn't just pass it around. They hammered the defense with an overwhelming 24 total shots. 24 times they wound up pulling the trigger from distance, firing from the flanks, throwing bodies forward, desperately trying to crack the code. 14 corners, nearly 700 completed passes. It was just a constant, pounding heartbeat of Spanish attacks, wave after wave after wave. And the result of all that overwhelming statistical dominance? 0 goals, nothing. Not a single one. Picture the scene. June 15th, 2026, Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. A capacity crowd of 71,000 people witnessed something truly extraordinary. Cape Verde, a World Cup debutant representing a nation of just 600,000 people, stepped onto the pitch against the European champions. This wasn't a fluke, right? It wasn't just blind luck. It was the perfect execution of a tactical siege, creating a claustrophobic, incredibly tense 90 minutes that completely paralyzed Spain. So, how exactly do you stop a Goliath? Well, there's a massive tactical contrast at play here. You have Spain's highly aggressive 4-3-3 positional hybrid, pushing fullbacks Pedro Porro and Marc Cucurella incredibly high to stretch the pitch horizontally. But then, look at the response. Cape Verde's manager, Bubista, deployed a perfectly flat, ultra-defensive 5-4-1 low block. There was absolutely zero pressing from Cape Verde. They didn't chase the ball, they simply guarded the space, creating a dense, immovable blue wall that essentially dared Spain to try and find a way through. Which brings us to absolute genius, the U-shaped possession trap. This is exactly where Spain's attacks hit a brick wall. Cape Verde allowed Spain to pass the ball heavily on the flanks and in their own half. But in the center of the penalty area, a total vacuum, a black hole. Every single time Spain moved the ball out wide, Cape Verde's wingbacks stepped up, and their center backs stayed perfectly compact. Spain literally spent the entire match passing in a U-shape around the penalty box. Talk about agonizing red zone frustration. They had the ball, sure, but never in the areas where goals are actually scored. And the data completely backs this up. Take Rodri, for example. He's Spain's most vital pivot, the undisputed engine of their entire system. He had 98 touches in this match, but check out the breakdown. 78 of those touches were in his own half or the middle third of the pitch. Cape Verde didn't even bother marking him when he dropped deep. They willingly let him have the ball in completely harmless, non-threatening areas. The conductor of the Spanish orchestra was forced to play his symphony 40 yards away from the goal. Let's carefully break down the exact surgical geometry of this blue wall. The back five operated as a perfectly flat, incredibly disciplined line. In front of them, a double pivot of Kevin Pina and Jamiro Montero expertly screened the penalty area, completely cutting off passing lanes to Spain's dangerous interior players like Pedri. Remember, there was zero pressing in Spain's half. None at all. And Cape Verde's wingers? They weren't attacking. Their sole task was to track Spain's overlapping fullbacks all game long. It was just a masterpiece of collective sacrifice. This wasn't just a low block, it was practically parked on the goal line. They maintained an incredibly deep 12.3-meter average defensive line. That's the deepest in the tournament's opening round. They suffocated all space behind them. And what's truly staggering is the sheer physical and collective discipline required to maintain that compact shape. As a team, Cape Verde ran a combined 112 kilometers, heavily outworking Spain despite only having 22% possession. Every player tracked back, every player blocked a lane, zero gaps. But you can't hold a line like that without a rock-solid anchor. And that brings us to the unsung hero of the outfield, Roberto Lopes. 8 clearances, 4 interceptions, 3 blocked shots. His execution was absolutely flawless. He flat out refused to dive into tackles, instead relying on perfect positioning to cut out cross after cross. He constantly forced Spain to settle for desperate shots from outside the box or from incredibly tight angles. He was the undisputed commander of that flat line. Of course, every great siege documentary needs a main character, right? A final line of defense who simply refuses to be broken. Enter Vozinha, 40 years old, making his World Cup debut. Spain would have easily scored 2 or 3 goals if not for the absolute masterclass put on by this veteran goalkeeper. He stayed on his line, he read the game perfectly, and he stepped up in the biggest possible way when his nation needed him most. 9 saves. 9 massive, heroic, golden interventions that completely shattered Spain's composure. Every single time Spain thought they had finally found a tiny crack in the blue wall, Vozinha was there. He saved shots with his legs, he made wild top corner reaction saves, he blocked point-blank headers. It was a relentless barrage, and he stood incredibly tall against every single strike. You could literally feel the tension ramping up throughout the first half. In the 12th minute, Nico Williams drives inside and fires a low shot, blocked by Vozinha. 31st minute, Dani Olmo unleashes a brilliant top corner strike. Vozinha denies it with pure, raw reflexes. Right before the whistle, in the 44th minute, Aymeric Laporte gets a point-blank header from 6 yards out, and Vozinha just slams the door shut again. He broke Spain's spirit before they even reached the dressing room. So, the second half rolls around, and the desperation from Spain is palpable. Manager Luis de la Fuente subs on Lamine Yamal in the 58th minute to force the issue. But watch how Bubista reacts. Just 4 minutes later, Cape Verde makes a shockingly brilliant tactical shift, dropping into a 5-5-0. Spain throws Alvaro Morata on in the 67th minute to finally add a penalty box presence, but honestly, it's too late. The wall has already adapted. And then the climax, the 83rd minute. Morata gets a point-blank header, and Vozinha makes the ultimate jaw-dropping reflex save to keep it 0-0. I mean, we have to stop and marvel at this adjustment for a second. The 5-5-0 formation. In the final 30 minutes, Bubista completely removed his striker. He dropped him deep to form a second 5-man midfield line directly in front of the back 5. It created an impenetrable 10-man barricade between the ball and the goal. It was a highly negative yet utterly masterful tactical adjustment that suffocated absolutely any remaining space for Spain's late substitutions. And the crazy part? Spain played right into their hands. They averaged a really sluggish 4.2 seconds per pass in the final third. When you're facing a 10-man barricade, you need lightning-fast, urgent transitions to move the defenders. But Spain just maintained their slow, methodical tempo. That gave Cape Verde's block more than enough time to shift horizontally as a single cohesive unit, absorbing everything Spain threw at them and rendering Spain's late crossing strategy completely useless. It's a complete masterclass in sideline warfare. Just look at the contrast between the managers. De La Fuente started Oyarzabal as a false 9. But against a deep block, a false 9 just pulls away from the goal, leaving absolutely no one to occupy the center backs. Bubista, meanwhile, deployed the perfect 5-4-1. De La Fuente made 0 halftime adjustments. Bubista executed flawless time management, slowing every dead ball to a crawl. De La Fuente switched to crosses way too late. Bubista shifted to a 5-5-0 ahead of time to kill the game. Simply put, a Goliath outwitted. You know, comparing this to other giant killings we saw in the opening round makes it even more fascinating. Think about Australia's blueprint against Turkey. They punished ambition, exploiting a high line with lethal 17-second transitions. But Cape Verde's method, totally different. They simply denied existence. They removed all space entirely. They proved that if you are disciplined enough and you're willing to sacrifice enough, you don't even need to counterattack to neutralize a giant. So what does this all mean for the modern game? Spain had 78% possession. They played beautifully in completely harmless areas. But if a perfectly disciplined, deeply entrenched 10-man wall, anchored by a 40-year-old goalkeeper on his debut, can completely neutralize a tournament favorite, is the golden era of positional possession football finally dying? Does having the ball even matter if you don't have the urgency and presence to actually break the wall? It's a massive question, and it's something every top manager is going to have to reckon with after witnessing this incredible siege.